So this is part 2 of my review of this interview with the fake witness. This morning I spent a bit of time listening back over some of the things that Darren Geddes said and the way he said it. And in all honesty, I would not be surprised if this person definitely is a member of the Mackenzie family or someone connected with Darren Geddes, who is quite clearly closely connected to the Mackenzie family anyway. So they're all pretty much interconnected. The speech patterns are so similar to those of what we've heard from members of the Mackenzie family. Even the intonation and the cadence sounds like they belong in that family. So I find that really interesting. And of course we've got the inconsistencies. The biggest one being that, first of all, she says she's got 3 little boys, and then she turns around at one point and says, I'm the mother of 4 boys, and tries to do a fix by saying, I had my little brother when he was in kinder or something like that. But she doesn't even use a full sentence there. She's not being clear. And she still refers to him as her little brother. So it's pretty clear that at no point in time has she ever considered him to be one of her own children. And we have the typical strategies like adding in an anonymous witness, someone who she's telling us, well, this person experienced it the same way as I did. So that way I must be telling the truth, even though we don't know who that person is. She doesn't identify that person. We certainly haven't heard from that person. And I mean, we have these phrases like, eyes don't lie, and believe me, which you all heard from Jamie, especially the believe me. I went through the transcript of the audio that I have from Janie Mackenzie, and she uses believe me no less than 16 times in that audio that I have. It is one of her favourite sayings. This person also talks with the 100%, 1000%. She over-explains when it's not necessary, but she doesn't provide finer details, and she provides absolutely not one single sensory experience. She tells us this guy is creepy, but other than saying that he looks like a guy out of Men in Black with an alien in his mouth, that's about all she gives us. She doesn't give us anything more to explain why she thinks this guy is creepy or why she thinks he doesn't belong. Now, we're going to get into part 2, and this is where the questioning comes in, and this is where I think it falls apart even more. So, buckle up. Let's just jump straight in, shall we?
What was the name of the park you were at?
It was Eastview Community Park.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, here's a fun little tidbit for you. If you go and search for this Eastview Community Park in Regina, you're going to find 2 separate locations. It seems that they are both based on one strip of land that runs through several blocks, but basically there's 2 lots of play equipment. You've got them at either ends of this strip of land. So both of the locations that I've marked have got swings, got play equipment. Now, here's what I find curious. So she gives so much other useless detail throughout this, and then asked which park it is. She very quickly drops Eastview Community Park and then changes the topic. Now, if she was a local, she would know that this park is actually a few separate parks or a few separate locations. And you would think that she would clarify, it's the end where the community hall is, or it's the end where the highway, closest to the highway. But she doesn't. So we're left guessing which location she's actually referring to. which is important, and I'm going to discuss that at the end of the video.
It took them, like, it was really bizarre. After I called, first I called the Nova Scotia police, and she took a big statement from me. Then I called, she's like, what you need to do is you need to call your local detachment. And I said, okay, I'll do that. So first I called the Regina Police Service, and they said, okay, well, you need to call RCMP because the jurisdiction thing, right? I said, okay. So I called the RCMP. 2 days it took them to even send an officer over to my house. Like 2 days.
So she's claiming that, first of all, she rang the Nova Scotia police, and the woman that she spoke to took a really, really long statement. Seriously? You ring up the state police and say, I think I've seen this missing child that RCMP have been putting notices out all over the country about. They're not going to take any statement from you. They are going to direct you straight to the RCMP. I also want to point out that this woman has already said that she has intimate knowledge of the case. She's watched various YouTube channels. She's aware of, I think she said, Chelsea Gray's page on Facebook. So she would have seen the posters, the missing posters for Jack and Lily. So she would know. If she's able to recognise Lily's eyes, then she's going to know that actually she needs to access these posters. She needs to go on Facebook, find one of these posters and contact RCMP. Why would she go through all this rigmarole of, first of all, ringing the Nova Scotia police, then her local police, and then finally ring RCMP? It doesn't make sense. And presumably, given that she waited 24 hours to ring the RCMP, because she says, oh, you know, I checked with my children the following morning. So she didn't go home and go, oh, this is the missing child. No, she went home, she had this epiphany that, oh, this is the missing child, and then she sat on the knowledge, apparently, till the next day, and confirmed it with her 4-year-old, who said, oh yes, that's her. And then she decided to contact authorities. Well, do you think that's maybe why the RCMP took 2 days to get back to you? If any of this story is remotely true. I mean, she claims that she was so affected by the realisation that this was the missing child. Note she never actually says Lily's name here. It kind of sounds familiar, doesn't it? Who else rarely uses Lily's name? Bingo, Janie. Because the Mackenzie family don't really like Jack and Lily. So again, it makes me think, you know, is this someone from the Mackenzie family? But anyway, so she's apparently so moved when she gets home from the park that, you know, she's crying, and even her husband's crying. But she waits till the next day to contact authorities. And despite her intimate knowledge of the case, she doesn't go directly to RCMP. Instead, she goes through 2 other sources first. I mean, seriously. This just does not ring true at all.
And I'm going to be honest with you, like, I've had a lot of like domestic phone calls with my ex, and they sent the same officer that actually went to school with my husband. So it was kind of a gong show. And he looks at me and he's just like, are you on drugs? Are you drunk? I said, are you kidding me? We're talking about a missing child here. This is a missing child.
So now we get the classic strategy that actually we saw Darren do quite frequently. And that is to now create essentially an excuse for why there isn't any copy of this report. She can't turn around and say, oh, I didn't think to report it. So instead, she's blaming it on the RCMP, another Darren Getty's strategy. She's basically setting it up here that because the guy who came just happened to be friends with her husband, that he thought she was a drunkard and didn't actually report it. It's the same strategy that Dingbat was using. Basically, anything that could possibly be verified, you add an escape clause. So, for example, when he was blabbering on about stuff to do with Malaya and a CHP, etc., he was like, well, now, if you find out that this isn't the case, it's because this is what I believed was going to be happening, but I haven't been given 100% confirmation. And he did that with anything where people could have turned around and checked up on it. And now this woman is doing the same thing. Well, I did speak to somebody, but on the off chance that you go and try and find this report, they just happen to have been friends with my ex-husband, so they really don't like me, and they're going to be super unprofessional and not put in a report for a missing child or over a missing child that might have been sighted. It's the classic strategy of creating plausible deniability ahead of time. So far we have this other woman other mother at the park, who apparently saw the same thing. But I'm willing to bet that if she was asked, oh, do you know the name of this other woman? No, and she hasn't been back at the park for a really long time. I don't know if maybe she's moved away. You're going to get something like that. And now you get oh, I definitely reported it, but the guy that came around and took the report, well, he's friends with my ex-husband or ex-partner, so he doesn't like me, so he threw the report out.
When you were at the park, obviously from your story, you didn't recognize who she was at the time, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
And I knew, I was staring at her because the way that she was talking to me, she was very scared. She actually took herself, the way she was positioning herself around the park was so that this guy wasn't able to see what she was saying to me.
Oh my gosh, the inflections sound so much like Janie McKenzie. I swear they do. Now, she's just been asked, so you didn't know it was her at the park? And she's like, no. And she's like, and she starts going, I knew. And she's like, I was staring at her because of the way that she was talking. So now it's not that she recognised her eyes. Now it is that this girl caught her attention because the way she was talking, she sounded scared. Now she doesn't describe how she thinks that. What about the way that she was talking made her sound scared? And she once again jumps back to her standard line of anytime she spoke, she made sure that she had her back to this guy. Which, as I said in yesterday's video, is a load of BS. This is a 6-year-old, apparently, allegedly, who would not have that level of problem-solving skills to actually think, I need to make sure this guy can't see me speak. She's not going to make that connection. She's not going to think that because she's in a playground playing with other people, that she's not allowed to speak to other people, for starters. But to think that she's going to have this higher level of cognition that you would expect with maybe a 10-year-old at the youngest, maybe a 12-year-old, not with a little kid. So it's just a complete utter BS story. And like I said, here again we have the wrong sorts of details. She brushes over why the way this girl was speaking made her believe that she was afraid. She goes back to the story of her turning her back to the man anytime she spoke, which again indicates holes in the narrative, because we're basically, like I said yesterday, it's like she's placing people in location, picking them up, putting them down on the board, because she has this little girl playing with her 4-year-old, and then all of a sudden, all her boys are over playing soccer with her husband, and the little girl's coming to her and asking to go on the swing. There's no transition there. And now she's claiming that the way this girl was positioning herself around the park was so this guy couldn't see what she was saying. So somehow, in between her playing with the little boy and then coming to this woman asking her to push her on the swing, at some point in time she was also in various locations around the park with this woman who is telling the narrative. Well, when did that happen? Because your original narrative makes it sound like she played with your son teleported over and started playing soccer with your husband, and then she came over, asked you to push her on the swings, and then you left, and as you left she tried to throw herself off the swings. When does that allow time for her to be talking to this woman all around the park? Now, this morning when I was listening to the audio of Darren Geddes, one of the things that struck me is that when he's talking, he sounds like he's basically giving a fan fiction narrative. He sounds like someone who has watched far too many action movies or far too many thrillers and basically is creating his own story from one of them. And I can't help thinking that something similar is going on with this woman. She's basing this on either some TV show or on some movie, or maybe she just spends too much time on YouTube watching true crime cases. Although given some of the massive issues with her narrative, I'm guessing she's probably more the sort of person that would watch them, the fiction versions on television.
She would always make sure that her back was like to him. Like I was pushing her on the swing and she jumped off the swing to turn herself around. So he was like, I was pushing her and she was going east on the swing. It was so strange. And then I just and I kept saying, where do I know this kid from? Where do I know this kid from?
So again, first we have the all around the park, and now she would always make sure that her back was to this guy when she was talking. But then basically she's telling us that, well, basically what she did was jump off the swing and turn around and face the other way. And that is always. That is one instance. For all you know, it could have been that the sun was in her eyes and it was too bright. You know, there are children out there in the world who have sensory issues. That said, I doubt very much that any of this happened even with a mistaken identity. Now here's a question. If you are there at a park with a child and you are certain that you know this child from somewhere, well, that gives you essentially an opening to ask, so who is your mother? Or, so what is your name? But apparently, even though this woman was saying to herself over and over, where do I know this kid from? And by her account, she had quite a lengthy conversation with this child. But she not once thought to ask her name or ask her what her mother's name was or who her mother was.
And as soon as I got home, I was like, it hit me. I was like, that is that child. That is that 100,000%. That was that child. They chopped her hair off. They had her dressed up as a little boy. and I hate to say this so blatantly, but a child at 6 years old, okay, I have a 6-year-old little boy, and if I was to put a little dress on him and cute little shoes, you would not be able to tell if he was a boy or a girl, because they're still at that stage where they have that soft-spoken voice. Just like a little girl, you could chop off her hair, and if she's wearing like little jean shorts or a little freaking rookie shirt or something to look like a boy, you're not going to be able to sit there and put her next to a boy and say, this is a boy, this is a boy, or this is a girl and that's a boy. You know what I mean? That's the age.
This is where the term far-fetched tale comes from, where someone starts with a narrative, and as the narrative progresses, they add more and more details that they're using to try and be convincing, to try and convince you to believe their tale. I suspect that she picked up on the fact that the woman that was listening to her responses, the rights or yes, were a bit flat, didn't sound like she was really believing her. So this woman is trying to step it up to be more convincing. Here's the thing though. Throughout her narrative, she has referred to this child as a she. She has not once said that she got a bad vibe because this child that looked like a boy, was dressed like a boy, was actually a girl. And yet she's identified her throughout as being a girl. And now she's saying that, well, you know, she was dressed like a boy, and at that age you can't really tell. If you make a girl look like a boy, you're going to think she's a boy. Well, you didn't think she was a boy. Her logic here is just completely off the dial. It just does not line up at all. And why did it take her till after she's given the entire narrative to suddenly introduce this factor? Because if it was so obvious to her, then it would have been the first thing that she commented on. She apparently noticed the eyes and thought that was worth mentioning, but it wasn't significant to her to mention that this child was dressed like a boy, made to look like a boy. That wasn't a significant part of her narrative until now, when she's trying to be convincing. After claiming the eyes don't lie, she has realised that she's got to come up with an explanation of why she didn't realise who this child was at the time when she was interacting with this child. So this is her explanation. Unfortunately, having just delivered her entire narrative, it falls flat because she's basically introducing it after the fact. Her entire narrative has been around this little girl. She's been calling her hers, calling her she. She never said anything felt off in terms of the appearance. All she said was that she thought the child was scared. She thought the man was a bit scary. Now, I'm sorry, but if you are telling a narrative like this, and you are saying you got the vibe that the child was frightened, and the man seemed like he didn't belong, then part of that would be, and you know what? This little girl was made to look like a boy. That would be such a huge red flag that any person with a quarter of a brain cell would probably do something immediately, either as they were leaving the park or even while they were at the park. Slip over, have a quiet word to your husband and say, can you go and call the police because something's not right here? Or if you feel embarrassed that you're doing that, you would at least make note of the registration of the van. Or you would try and find a way to subtly take a photo or create a video. And no, don't BS me and say, oh, you couldn't do that in a park with all these people. I've got a name for you. Libby German. For those of you who've never heard of Libby German, back in 2017, Libby was 14. And she managed to film on her iPhone the man who abducted her and her best friend, and who later basically made them not alive anymore. And he was completely unaware of the fact. I think many of us have found ourselves in situations where we've basically secretly filmed something because maybe it concerned us, or we wanted to show it to someone later on, but we didn't want people to know that we were filming it. She claims that she couldn't do it because she couldn't, do anything because she had to supervise her children. But she also claims that her children were playing soccer with her husband, which basically meant that she was completely free to actually really focus on what was going on in front of her. So her narrative is just complete utter BS. I also just want to point out there's many elements to this narrative that when you do a bit of digging, you will discover that actually there you can find these elements existing in social media. So, like I said, this woman referred to Chasla Gray's Facebook page at one point. Well, over a period of time, over the last couple of weeks, Chasla and another lady who posts on there have been posting images of Lily and Jack with different hairstyles, saying, focus on the face. Learn the face shape, because if they've been abducted, then they may have had their hair changed. Seems like this woman may have seen this on Facebook and thought, yep, that's a good part of the narrative. She didn't think about it, though, when she started her narrative, and only threw it in at the end. I saw a comment under yesterday's video where someone commented that basically some online psychic had described this guy that this woman is describing. And then we have the complete utter lack of originality, where we have Janie telling us that Lily and Jack were always playing on the swings. And this little girl, what does she want to do? She wants to be on the swings. She wants this woman to push her on the swings. Funnily enough, according to Janie's narrative, Lily and Jack are always on the swings, and she'll watch them from her RV. Some versions she goes out and watches them while she's out there. But she basically says that Malaya never goes outside and interacts with these children. Sometimes if Daniel's there, he will watch them. But if we're to believe Janie's narrative, then these children were able to basically push themselves on the swings. Didn't need an adult to push them on the swings. And yet apparently this little girl did.
So, when you were pushing her, when you were having this interaction with her, well, first of all, did you ask her name?
I didn't. I didn't ask the child's name, no.
Okay.
It wasn't no, I wasn't thinking about that, but I was asking questions because I know she wasn't from there.
So you're repeatedly asking yourself where you know this child from, but you weren't thinking about asking her name. You apparently knew this child wasn't from there, but you believed that you knew this child. Well, that should have narrowed things down a little bit.
All the kids, it's always the same kids. It's a very Indigenous community, and it's always the same kids. You look, and it's all the same kids all the time. It's a lot of kids from foster homes in the. So it's always the same parents.
It's always the same kids. And yet, you know that you know this kid. You also know this kid is not from around here. You never wanted to ask her name though, that never occurred to you. But she's also claiming here that there's a lot of foster kids here. Well, it didn't occur to you that maybe this child was a new foster child? We're talking about a place that is actually not so small at all. It has a freaking international airport. It has a major highway running along its periphery. And you're saying it's a small community and we only ever have the same children and the same adults here. I don't buy that. I mean, seriously, I lived in a small regional town for quite some time. The population of that town was roughly 1,000 people. And yet, on those occasions, when I stopped at the local park on my way home for one reason or another, I couldn't tell you how many times I saw people at the playground with their children who I'd never seen before. This lady is talking about a city with a population of 250,000, and yet apparently she knows every child and every mother that goes to that local park. A local park whichever section she went to, was still in the middle of a city. I mean, seriously, get real.
Always. And when a handy bus is sitting there, it's like, okay, well, who's in a wheelchair? Like, just very strange. And the guy was the guy was scary, actually, because I like, who is this creep? Why is he watching these kids?
Was the man Indigenous?
He was not. He was a Caucasian male. He was tall, very stocky. He had reddish hair. He had facial hair. He was wearing Carhartts. Like,
notice how she basically goes back to the same narrative every time. She's not building on it. This guy's scary. He's a ginger. He's a bit stocky. He was wearing Carhartts. And, I mean, you know, presumably either it was after school or it was school holidays. I don't know when holidays are in Canada. So 3rd week of May, I don't know, let me know. Is that holidays or is that just maybe it was after school? Maybe this guy was at work and his wife asked him to pick their daughter up from school because she was delayed and he was at work, and that is why he was driving that van. Maybe he had a little bit of time, so he took her to the park before taking her home to her mother. There's so many scenarios, and yet apparently you're not allowed to drive a handy van in Regina. And you're certainly not allowed to take a child to the park if you're driving one of them. I mean, presumably it is the same in Canada, that if you have a group home with a number of people living in that group home who have various disabilities, and you have a worker who goes in and takes them for day trips and everything like that, that worker will probably be allocated that van, regardless of whether anyone in that group home is in a wheelchair. Because in terms of these sort of organisations, the funding is limited, so they're not going to have a range of vehicles available to them. They have money to buy a vehicle, they're going to buy a vehicle that's going to serve all their needs. I'm going to have a bit of a stab in the dark here and presume that Canada, like Australia, doesn't have a law that says if you have a handy van and you are going to drive a handy van, that you must have someone in that handy van who is normally wheelchair bound.
We're talking the middle of summer and the guy's wearing card hearts.
Sorry, what are card hearts?
Card hearts are like what constructions worker wear, like the overalls.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he wasn't well dressed.
No, he looked like he just stepped off a job site.
Okay.
Yeah. And yes, her mom did sit. She kept saying, my mom said she's coming to get me. My mom said she's coming to get me. And I was like, well, when is she coming? Well, I've already slept and she hasn't come and got me yet. And I'm like, what?
So you've probably noticed by now, I've left it for a while through the video because I figure the more people hear it, the more it's going to make sense what I say. But when she is telling this narrative, she is telling it like she is reading a story. Every person has a voice. Every person is speaking as themselves. She's not telling it in the way that you normally would give someone a recount of events. You know, I asked her about her mum and she said that she hadn't seen her mum for a few days. No, she switches into a voice for this little girl. She goes into first person for the little girl. This is purely fiction. She's also repeatedly repeating sentences to try and basically convince her audience. She's like, she kept saying, my mum's coming to get me, my mum's coming to get me. This is not a natural retelling style. This is a narrative. This is a story. And apparently it never occurred to her to ask this child her name, even though this child has repeatedly said, my mum's coming to get me. Wouldn't that be an opening? Who's your mum? What's your name? Like, she's supposedly having this really, really long conversation, and yet she's never thought to ask this child her name.
What is this kid talking about? Like, not because kids talk all the time, right? But when I came home and I was sitting there and I was replaying everything in my head, I was like, she was trying to tell me something. Like, you could tell she was trying to tell me something. She was terrified. But she was trying to do it in a way. Kids aren't stupid, right? I mean, they know how to talk in a manner when they feel unsafe without getting in trouble.
Yeah.
Okay, can I just say outright, what a load of crap. 6-year-olds are going to tell it how it is. They're going to be entirely truthful and tell you precisely what it is they want you to know. They don't yet have the cognitive ability to process things to a point where they think, I want to communicate this, but I'm not going to blurt it out. So how can I communicate it in a way that is going to just give someone a clue? That sort of thinking is beyond a 6-year-old. I mean, one of my favourite stories from going back way back when is it relates to a little 7-year-old boy, and he was standing next to his friend who was also 7. And he very proudly announced to me that his friend's father shot his father. Now, it's not what it sounds. They were out in the bush, messing around, and basically a bit of buckshot got into this other guy's arm. It's not like he aimed a gun at him and shot him. But, you know, he just blurted it out. He didn't think, I need to think of a way of saying this carefully that's not going to make my friend's father look like a jerk. No, he just blurted it out, and I had to basically question him. and actually get a bit of clarification to find out what the heck was going on. She's applying processing abilities that do not exist at that age level.
They do.
Yeah.
Because I have kids of my own. They do it to me all the time. If it's somebody about school, this kid's bullying me at school, and they'll try to act nonchalant, especially if the child's right there.
Let's talk about gender stereotypes. You have a little boy who's being bullied at school, and you're talking about him being nonchalant. You're not talking about him talking in code and trying to find a secret way to tell you he's being bullied. You're basically talking about him, essentially by the sounds of it, trying to talk it down. Oh, Freddie pushed me over. And to be honest, if the child is directly in front of him, I doubt that that your child is going to tell you, Freddie pushed me over, while he's standing directly in front of Freddie, unless he's feeling quite bold. If Freddie was actually a bully, the kid would wait till he got home to tell you this. But definitely there's a huge difference between nonchalant, trying to make it seem like you're not as upset about it as you are. There's a huge difference between that and a child speaking in code and hoping you'll figure it out.
So, THRD, Eastview Community Park, Saskatchewan, Regina area. And this happened, I'm sorry, when?
It was about 2 weeks after they actually went missing, because I was sitting, I'm like, why is there no Amber Alert? Like, I don't understand why they haven't put an Amber Alert out for these kids.
I already pointed this out in yesterday's video, but in the earlier part of this interview, she claimed it was in June. And then here we get it was 2 weeks after they went missing, which, like I said, would basically put it late May, mid to late May, roughly 16th, 17th, because they went missing on the 2nd of May.
It floors me. It floors me.
And I mean, this is probably, a stupid question to ask because you would have said so, but you haven't seen them since, I'm assuming.
Not once. And we went to the park. I went to the park the next day and the following day to see if they would come back, and they haven't.
Kind of like a stray cat? I mean, seriously. If she truly believed that this was Lily, would she really expect them to be returning to the park where this nosy woman had been chatting with this child and paying super close attention to this child? And given that she allegedly reported it the day after, well, there would be a bolo out on that van. So surely either the guy would have been arrested or he would have already left town.
They never did come back. That was the only time they were ever there. It was very bizarre. Mm-hmm. And the police are like, okay, well, we're looking for that kind of vehicle.
So you'll notice that this woman is so determined to be convincing that she has to fill the gaps. So the woman who's interviewing her is basically just throwing in the occasional mm-hmm. And first of all, she's like, and I haven't seen them ever since. And her only response is a mm-hmm. So she goes, it's so bizarre. And that obviously didn't get enough of a response either. So then she jumps in about the police looking for this handy van.
They were looking for the handy bus as well. They said they couldn't find it in the area. Well, no shit, because it's been 2 days now. And now you guys are just looking like, It's horrible.
Is it a handy bus or a handy van? Was she saying handy van before? Because now she's calling it a handy bus. And she's, like, blaming them. Oh, of course it's not going to be in the area. It's been 2 days. And yet you went back for 2 days to see if they'd returned to the park. And you didn't report it to the following day. But you're going to blame the RCMP. And I'm going to come back to, in terms of, looking in the area. It's not like they just drove around all the streets looking for it. They have technology. They would have been making use of tag readers on vehicles, on cameras in the area to look for this van. And, yeah, put a pin in that.
Dibmar, Saskatchewan is provinces away.
On the west coast, we're we're pretty much on the west side of Canada.
Yeah, they're sort of
right off the Trans-Canada Highway.
So those of you who've been following my channel for a while, I'm sure you already spotted it, and I probably don't even need to say it, but I will. So when someone offers something up unprompted, then you need to pay attention and ask why that is significant for them. And in this instance, when they offer up that unprompted thing and sound quite proud of themselves, then you really need to pay attention. So the interviewer said to her, well, that's several provinces away. And she says, yes, it's on the west side of Canada. And then we get the delivery. She's probably been waiting for a chance to say this throughout the entire interview. It's on the Trans-Canada Highway. Of course, she stumbles over it though, but you can hear she's quite proud of herself. You can hear the change in tone as she says it. But like I said, she stumbles over Trans-Canada Highway. This is her moment. She had to deliver this. This is important. But at the same time, she ballsed it up. Now, if you happen to live in a city that is on a highway, then the name of that highway is just going to flip off your tongue. For example, when I make a trip down to Melbourne, I go down the Calder Freeway. I could also go down the McIver Highway, but I'd prefer the Calder because it is much faster because it's a freeway as opposed to a highway. But you'll notice as I'm explaining this to you, I'm not stumbling over the names of these places because they're names that I use frequently. They're not names that I have to actually access in my brain. They just stumble off the tongue. I don't have to think about it. I just say it. So it's a red flag, first of all, that she stumbled over what she was trying to say. But also the glee in her delivery. This is an important part of her narrative. Yes, we live right on this Trans-Canada Highway. Because part of her narrative is that this child is being transported across Canada. And I'm going to come back to that. I can't help thinking that part of this narrative, the thinking of the narrative, involved having a look at a map of Canada, having a look at what cities were on the Trans-Canada Highway. This individual thought that this place, Regina, looked pretty good. And they went with that. And look, there's a massive park there in the middle of town. Let's find out what that's called. This woman is intentionally leading the narrative here. she wants to make sure that she gets that point across. Because obviously, if you are going to claim an unverified sighting, then you need to have some way of basically explaining it away when there's no evidence of that particular sighting. So we have, this is on a major throughway. So the reason they didn't find them was because they kept going. And of course, the officer that went to her house just happened to be friends with her ex. And that's the reason the report was never made. Again, it's all about plausible deniability. These are the reasons why you've not heard anything about it. It's like Darren Geddes with his, I have to get that one extra puzzle piece and then I can tell you everything. But until then, I can't tell you anything at all. And, well, you know, I was this close to solving it, but then Malaya took off to the reservation and now I can't speak to her and now I can't solve it. He was always one step ahead, the plausible deniability, and this person is doing exactly the same thing.
Yeah. A very, very significant difference.
Very,
Yeah, a
very.
couple thousand kilometers away. Yeah.
So I had to look that up because I couldn't catch what she said there in terms of how many thousand. It is roughly 4,000 kilometres.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
And she didn't mention anything about a sibling or a brother or anything like that, I'm assuming.
No, she didn't. But like I said, the way that she was throwing herself off the swing was like in hopes that she would hurt herself. Because if she really hurt herself, there's other parents that were there. Oh my God, she broke her arm. Call 911. Call the ambulance. You know what I mean? You can tell she was trying to draw attention in a nonchalant way to herself.
So we can tell straight up that that is complete utter BS. Why? Because of the use of tense and also the inference that she was doing it multiple times. The way that she was throwing herself off the swing, which infers either she's narrating a story and this is a real-time narration. In other words, she's taking you there to the moment. You're there reading a story, not actually hearing a retelling. She's telling it essentially in present tense. But the way she was throwing herself off the swing infers basically she did it more than once. Well, she didn't. According to your story, you went to leave, so this child threw herself off the swing and the guy grabbed her by the arm and dragged her off to the car. She didn't throw herself off the swing, climb on the swing, throw herself off again, etc. And don't forget, in this part of the story, she was apparently calling her 8-year-old to come along, let's go. Even though, presumably, the 8-year-old was with her father, coming back from having played soccer. So it's not like she would have been standing there watching this girl for 5 minutes as she repeatedly climbed on the swing and threw herself off. Her main focus would have been on her son, allegedly. And then, when she realised he was coming, she would have turned her back on the swings and been headed towards her car. Unless, of course, she's some weird person that walks backwards all the time. And look, you know, if this story is true, I would like to know what it is about the way this girl was throwing herself off the swings that made her think that she was doing it for attention or to hurt herself. Because honestly, I have seen the way some kids dismount from swings. It is an extreme sport for some children. Apparently, it's not nearly as much fun unless you get that swing going really high and then as it swings through, you launch yourself off the swing and then you try and run as you land and hope that you don't hit the deck. And no matter how many times you say, you're going to break an arm doing that, they have no fear. They have no sense that they are going to injure themselves, and they will continue to do it. There is also the possibility that the child was simply throwing a tantrum because you were leaving and you weren't going to push them on the swings anymore. She is once again applying a type of thinking that you are not going to have from a 6-year-old. A 6-year-old is not going to go, okay, I'm going to make sure that I break my arm so someone has to call an ambulance so they can rescue me. No way. Again, we're talking about the level of development, cognitive development for a 6-year-old. Like I said, many kids that age aren't even going to connect the flying off the swing with the possibility of a broken bone. Unless they have experienced a broken bone from flying off the swing in the past, it's not something that's going to occur to them. If they have experienced a broken bone from flying off the swing in the past, then they're sure as hell not going to try it again because they're going to know what that pain feels like. And as for the no mention of a sibling, can we recognise these two children were only roughly, I think they were 19 months apart. They were pretty much joined at the hip. There are countless photos that show you just how closely connected these two children were. Lily clearly adored her little brother. So you have this child in a playground with other children, and she's apparently playing with a 4-year-old. And her comment is about her mother is supposed to pick her up, but hasn't done so. I'm sorry, but the first thing on her mind would have been to mention her little brother, particularly given that she was playing with a 4-year-old. If it had been Lily who she encountered, she would have been far more concerned over where Jack was than where her mother was.
It was very sad. Like I've lost a lot of sleep over it because I'm a mom and I've been following this story and it doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't make sense to everybody. Like kids don't vanish like that.
Yeah, for sure.
With no trace of nothing.
What was she wearing?
What was she wearing? She was wearing little slush pants. Little slush pants. She had little dinosaur shoes on that lit up.
Well, of course they're going to be dinosaur shoes, aren't they? Because, Jack was wearing dinosaur boots and Jack loved dinosaurs. So fake Lily is going to have to be wearing dinosaur shoes. She's not very original. When you look at details that she gives, there's usually a reason that you can find for them. And this guy is apparently a scary, evil dude. But he bought her a pair of light-up shoes. Not only is that extremely kind for this apparently evil dude, but that's not going to draw attention to this child that you've apparently abducted, is it? I mean, heck, why not just put a sign on the side of your van that says, "Look at me"? I mean, honestly, nobody is going to go to the expense of buying a fancy light-up pair of dinosaur shoes for a child who they have allegedly abducted and who they probably don't want people to notice.
and she was wearing it was a t-shirt, a boy's t-shirt, but it had like a little sailor hat or something on it. It was, yeah. I'll tell you, her eyes, as soon as I got home, I was looking at her picture. I said, oh my God, that's where I know this kid from. Because it was plastered all over the news.
So she's forgotten at this point that she's actually said that she'd been researching the case and she'd been looking on social media, etc. Now she recognises her because it was plastered all over the news. Here's the thing though, 2 weeks in, these are the photos that we had. These are the photos that were on the news. You see the problem here? Both these photos, Lily's eyes are almost closed. So what is going to make them so distinctive? Maybe if it was more than 2 weeks after the children went missing and there were more photos released, then maybe she would have seen these other 2 images of Lily, but not on the news. It's only quite recently that places like CBC have basically added different photos of Lily and Jack to their articles. So no, if you'd only seen this case plastered all over the news, then looking at those 2 original photos that were released, I'm not sure that you would recognise Lily just from those eyes. Not given that her eyes are like 3/4 closed in the photos because she's smiling. Maybe you'd notice if the child had a gap between her 2 front teeth. But the eyes, not so much.
Like it was everywhere, social media, everything. And I'm like, that's the kid. And my hubby was just like, he couldn't believe it. He couldn't believe it. He's like, you are so right. And I said, I know. And then when that mom the next day said that to me, she's like, you know who that kid was, right? I said, yes, thank you very much. Absolutely. I thought I was going crazy. I'm not even kidding. I thought I was going crazy.
Okay, so she's attempting here to create credibility by adding additional characters who recognise the same thing. She's also added in now that, oh yeah, you know, social media also. And she's claiming that her husband recognised the child as well. What's interesting here is that her husband was apparently playing soccer with his boys most of the time, for starters. And so he probably didn't even notice the child. But not only that, I mean, seriously, are you telling me that this guy is just as obsessed over the case as this woman? Because 9 times out of 10, when you have someone who follows the case intensely like this, their partner will probably indulge them to some extent, but they're not going to sit down next to them on the couch and put it up on the big screen on the TV and watch a whole YouTube episode on Lily and Jack, are they? They might see them mentioned on the news, but most of the time you're not going to have both partners that deeply engrossed in a case that they're like, oh yeah, I recognise the child by their eyes. Complete utter BS. All she's doing here is the classic move of creating external credibility. Made up witnesses. This other lady experienced it the same way as I did, and she recognised her. And my husband, he recognised her. So, no, I'm not nuts. I was completely right. And can we acknowledge here the fact that she has to come back to this and once again offer up this external validation suggests to me that she knows that it's bullshit And she's trying just a little bit too hard to convince people that it's the truth. I half expect her to start doing a Janie and start every sentence with, "Believe me." So I'm going to stop here yet again, because part 2 has actually ended up being well over 2 hours long. So it makes sense, rather than to put out a super long one, to instead split it into 2 parts, especially because it is heading up towards 10 p.m, which means I've been working on this for 12 hours and I still haven't finished with presenting the research that I did, which I need to share at the end of part 3. So please do come back tomorrow for part 3, and I will have that all wrapped up in a nice little bow for you with some interesting research at the end that should make it pretty clear that this whole narrative is a pile of BS. I could have just presented my research in a single video and not bothered going through the audio. But like I said in part 1, there are some people that you have to kind of hit them over the head with it for them to be convinced. And to be honest, I did want the satisfaction of tearing this narrative to shreds, because I really have a dim view of people who come forward with fake stories, especially when those fake stories have the potential to cause distress for people close to the case. So on that note, thanks for listening. If you're new to my channel, please subscribe. Also, please hit that like button. Hit it for that 12 hours that I've just spent working on this video. And of course, please leave a comment below. Thank you, and I will catch you for part 3.